The sky was red with fire and smoke drifting above the battlefield, where broken machines and fallen bodies lay scattered across the torn ground. The war between humans and the alien warriors had raged for days with no rest and no mercy. Soldiers on both sides had fought with every ounce of strength they had until only a few still stood, and among those survivors was Daniel, a human soldier whose armor was battered and whose blade dripped with the grime of battle. His breath came heavy, but his spirit remained steady, for he knew this fight would decide not only his fate, but the fate of his people. Across the ruined plain stood Roken, the alien champion, towering over all others. His scales glistened under the burning sky, and his weapon was a massive blade that had cut down dozens of men without pause. Roken was the pride of his people, feared by many and admired by his own kind. He had believed no human could ever stand against him, yet now he staggered wounded with one knee pressed into the earth. His chest rose and fell as he tried to gather the strength to rise, but the battle had taken more from him than he wanted to admit. Daniel moved closer, his boots crunching over shards of metal and broken earth. He did not rush, nor did he show fear, because he had already seen Roken's power and survived it. That alone gave him confidence. He raised his weapon ready for the final strike, but his eyes met the alien's gaze, and in that gaze he did not see pride or anger anymore. He saw fear. He saw desperation. Roken dropped his weapon, letting it fall heavy against the ground, and his clawed hand stretched out as if reaching for something beyond him. His voice was deep and rough, but it carried a tremor that no one had ever heard before. He said the words slowly, as if each one weighed heavily on his tongue. "Human, please spare me. I will do anything to live." Sound silenced the battlefield. The few human soldiers who still stood nearby gasped in disbelief. Some looked at Daniel, urging him to finish the enemy right there. Others shouted that it was a trick, that no alien of Roken's kind would ever surrender. They had always fought to the death, yet here was their champion brought low, kneeling before a human, and begging for his life. Daniel's grip tightened around his blade, and his mind raced. He had lost friends in this war. He had seen his people burned and crushed under the might of these alien warriors. Mercy was not what anyone expected. Mercy was not what anyone would demand of him at that moment, and yet Daniel hesitated. He looked at Roken, broken and stripped of his pride, and he thought about what kind of victory it would be to end his life then and there. Would killing him change the war? Would it bring back the fallen, or could there be something greater in letting him live? Roken lowered his head, his voice shaking again. "I will serve, I will obey. Just let me live. I cannot fall here like this, not like this." The soldiers behind Daniel shouted, "Kill him, do not trust him. He is a beast, he will rise again and strike you down." Daniel kept silent for a moment. He walked a circle around the kneeling warrior, studying the way his body trembled and the way his eyes no longer burned with rage but with fear. Something inside Daniel stirred it. It was not pity, and it was not weakness. It was something else, something his people carried with them through every battle. It was the belief that sometimes sparing a life could bring more strength. Then, taking one, he lowered his weapon slightly and spoke firmly, "You will live, Roken, but your life now belongs to me. You will serve the humans, you will walk with us, and you will prove with every step that sparing you was not a mistake." Roken's head rose slowly, his expression mixed with confusion and disbelief. He had expected death. He had accepted death. But instead he was given a chance to live, and though his pride was shattered, something deeper in him felt bound by those words. His people's code demanded that if one was spared by an enemy, then loyalty was owed. It was an ancient vow, and it could not be broken without dishonor. The battlefield around them seemed to hold its breath. The alien warriors who still lived hissed in shame at their fallen champion, while the human soldiers muttered angrily at Daniel's choice. Yet none moved to stop it, for they saw the fire in Daniel's eyes, and they knew he had already made his decision. Roken pressed his forehead against the dirt in a gesture of submission. His voice was rough but clear. "I will serve you, human. My life is yours until it ends." Daniel did not smile, nor did he show relief. He only nodded and lowered his blade completely. The war was not over, but in that moment something had changed. The image of a human standing over a defeated alien champion who begged for mercy would spread through both armies. It was a sign that the balance of power was shifting. As Daniel turned away, he knew he would face doubt and anger from his own people. They would not understand why he had spared an enemy who had killed so many. Yet Daniel also knew that mercy was not weakness, and perhaps this choice would open a path no one else could see. Roken remained on his knees, his body aching, his pride in ruins, yet in his heart a new weight had settled. He had begged for life and received it. Now he was bound to the very people he had sworn to destroy. His fate was no longer his own, and as he followed Daniel across the wreckage of the battlefield, he could not escape the thought that this human was unlike any warrior he had ever known. Sun dipped behind the smoke-filled horizon, casting long shadows across the broken land. The war had not ended but for Roken. The battle was finished. He had been defeated, and yet he lived not because of his strength, but because a human had chosen to spare him. He walked slowly behind Daniel, each step heavy with shame, but also with this strange spark of something new, a beginning that neither of them yet understood. The camp of the human soldiers was alive with the smell of smoke and the noise of tired men speaking in low voices. Some patched their wounds with rough bandages while others sharpened their blades. Even though their hands trembled from exhaustion, the war had worn them down, yet none allowed weakness to show, because weakness meant death. Daniel walked among them with his head high, though his armor was dented, and his shoulders heavy with fatigue. Behind him walked Roken, the alien champion once feared by every human, now stripped of his weapon and pride. The soldiers watched him with eyes full of hatred and suspicion. No one had ever seen such a thing before. A warrior of Roken's kind was supposed to fight until death, and yet here he was alive following the man who had defeated him. The humans whispered to each other, calling it madness, calling it a mistake. Some cursed Daniel, under their breath, saying he had endangered them all by keeping the monster alive. They remembered their brothers and sisters who had fallen under the alien's blade, and every step Roken took through their camp was a wound reopened. Daniel stopped at the center of the camp and ordered Roken to kneel. The alien obeyed, though the act burned his pride like fire. He lowered himself to the ground and rested his hands on his knees. While the humans gathered around, some laughed bitterly at the sight, some spit at the dirt near him, others simply stared, trying to understand what they were seeing. Daniel raised his hand for silence and spoke with a steady voice. "This one is not our prisoner, and he is not our friend. He is bound by mercy, and by the ancient vow of his kind. He will live among us, and he will serve us. His life is no longer his own, it belongs to humanity." Now the murmurs grew louder. Soldiers shouted that Daniel had lost his mind. They demanded blood. They demanded justice. Daniel did not shout back. He simply looked at them and said, "I chose to spare him because killing him would change nothing, but keeping him alive may change everything. If you cannot see that now, then watch and wait." Roken listened to the words, his sharp ears catching every sound. He hated the way the humans looked at him as if he was less than dirt, but he knew the vow that chained him could not be broken. To betray the one who spared his life would mean dishonor that no warrior could bear. He lifted his head slowly, and his deep voice rumbled across the camp. "I will obey the human who defeated me. My life is his until death. If he commands me to fight, I will fight. If he commands me to die, I will die." A heavy silence followed, and though many soldiers did not trust him, they could not deny the weight of his words. Daniel nodded satisfied and told 2 guards to keep watch over Roken for the night. It was not because he feared betrayal, but because he knew trust could not be built in a single day. He needed time to show his men that sparing Roken was not weakness. When darkness covered the land, Daniel sat by the fire sharpening his blade. His mind replayed the image of Roken, kneeling before him begging for life. He remembered the voices of his comrades urging him to strike, and he wondered if he had made the right choice. Yet deep inside he felt something he could not explain. He believed mercy was not only for the weak, it was a weapon of its own kind, and he intended to wield it. Roken sat a short distance away, surrounded by guards. His body ached from his wounds, but his spirit was restless. He had never imagined begging a human for mercy. He had always believed humans were fragile creatures, quick to die, quick to break. Yet, the one called Daniel had stood against him and survived more than that. He had chosen not to kill when he had every right to. Roken could not understand it. He had been raised to see compassion as weakness, but now he wondered if it was something else, something stronger. The night was long and uneasy. The humans whispered among themselves about what Daniel planned. Some thought he wanted to use Roken as a shield. Others thought he wanted to break him like an animal. No one could agree, and no one could sleep peacefully knowing a creature like that lay in their camp. The fires burned low, and the sound of the wind carried with it the smell of ash and blood. When morning came, Daniel called Roken to him and gave him his first command. You will carry supplies for the wounded soldiers. You will show them that your hands can do more than kill. Roken's eyes narrowed, but he bowed his head and obeyed. He lifted heavy crates with ease and moved them where Daniel ordered. The humans watched with suspicion, some mocking him, others spitting insults, but Roken did not respond. He carried the weight without a word, because his vow demanded obedience. Throughout the day, Daniel tested him further. He sent him to gather wood for the fires, to fetch water from the stream, to help build defenses for the camp. Each task was beneath a warrior of his rank, yet he completed them with silent endurance. His pride screamed inside him, but his honor would not allow defiance. Slowly, a few soldiers began to see that perhaps Daniel's choice was not entirely foolish. At sunset, a small group of scouts returned with news that enemy forces were regrouping nearby. The war was far from finished. Daniel gathered his men and prepared to move, but he knew the path ahead would be dangerous. He looked at Roken and spoke with firm authority. If you are bound to me, then you will prove it tomorrow, not with words, not with vows, but with your actions. Roken stared at him for a long moment, then placed his fist against his chest in the gesture of his people. I will not break my word, human. If my life belongs to you, then it will serve until the end. The camp settled once more, and though mistrust remained, a seed had been planted. A defeated enemy walked among them, not as a prisoner, but as a servant of mercy, and only time would reveal whether Daniel's gamble would bring ruin or redemption. Roken lay beneath the stars that night, his massive form stretched across the ground. He remembered the moment he had begged for life, the shame that burned in him still. Yet he also remembered the strange strength he saw in Daniel's eyes, and for the first time he began to wonder if perhaps there was more to humans than he had ever believed. Dawn rose over the battlefield with a pale light that stretched across the ruined land. The human camp stirred, awake soldiers moving slowly through the morning air, their bodies still carrying the weight of yesterday's battles. Some cleaned their weapons, others checked their wounds, but all of them carried the same question in their hearts. What would become of the alien warrior who now lived among them? Roken stood apart from the rest, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the camp. He carried the marks of battle on his body, his wounds healing, but his pride still raw. He had been a champion once feared by many. Now he lifted crates of supplies and fetched water like a common laborer. The humans did not let him forget his shame. They muttered insults as he passed some, threw stones at him, while others spat at his feet. He did not respond to any of it. His silence was his only shield, for his vow was unbreakable, and his honor demanded obedience. Daniel watched closely from a distance. He knew the hatred of his men was natural. They had lost family and friends to the alien blades, and seeing Roken alive among them was like salt on open wounds. Yet Daniel also believed that time would reveal the truth. Mercy was not weakness. And he wanted to show his men that even an enemy could become more than a monster if given the chance. As the day unfolded, Daniel gave Roken harder tasks. He sent him beyond the edge of the camp to scout the broken terrain where enemies might gather. Roken moved through the ashes with sharp eyes, his instincts honed by years of war. He returned with knowledge of enemy movements and traps hidden in the earth. The soldiers were surprised by the detail of his report, though few admitted it aloud. Daniel thanked him in front of everyone, making it clear that the alien service was not without value. Still, suspicion lingered. At night, some soldiers whispered of killing Roken in his sleep. They said it was only a matter of time before he betrayed them, and when that time came, it would be too late. Daniel overheard these whispers, but he did not punish the men. Instead, he told them quietly, "Trust is not born in a day. Give him the chance to prove what he is bound to prove. If he fails, then his life is mine to take." Roken heard the whispers as well, and though he pretended not to care, each word cut deeper than any blade. His people had once cheered his name, and now even the weakest human spat upon him. He felt the anger rise inside him, like fire, but each time he thought of breaking free, he remembered the moment Daniel spared him. The human could have ended him without hesitation, yet he had chosen mercy. That act bound Roken in ways chains never could. True test came one afternoon, when a small unit of humans marched out with Daniel leading them, and Roken ordered to follow. They moved into the ruins of a shattered village, searching for supplies. The air smelled of smoke and death. Broken walls stood like skeletons against the sky. As they gathered what little remained, shadows moved in the distance. Enemy scouts had been waiting, and soon a skirmish began. The humans fought with desperate courage, blades clashing and rifles firing through the rubble. Roken felt the familiar rush of battle, his instincts screaming to strike. He fought alongside Daniel, his massive strength cutting through enemies like paper. But still, the humans around him looked with suspicion. Some shouted warnings not to trust him even as he tore enemies away from their throats. At one moment, Daniel was cornered, 3 alien warriors surrounding him, their blades raised. Roken saw the chance to act or to turn away if he wanted freedom. This was the moment. All he had to do was let Daniel fall, and his vow would die with him. The fire of his old pride burned in his chest, urging him to take the path of vengeance. But the memory of Daniel lowering his blade that day stopped him. Instead, Roken charged forward, his body a wall of muscle and rage. Cut down 2 of the warriors with a roar, and threw himself in front of the third, taking the strike across his arm. The wound was deep, but he did not falter. He shoved the enemy back and gave Daniel the opening to strike the final blow. The humans froze in shock. They had seen the alien shield Daniel with his own body and bleed for him. The whispers of betrayal grew silent, replaced with uncertain stares. Daniel looked at Roken, breathing heavy, his blade dripping with blood, and he said loud, "Enough for all to hear. This is what loyalty looks like. Remember it." The fight ended quickly. After that, the enemy scouts fled into the smoke, leaving the humans standing among the ruins. Blood stained the dirt, both human and alien, but the image of Roken protecting Daniel lingered in every mind. Some still doubted his intentions, but they could not deny what they had witnessed. The alien had chosen to save a human, instead of letting him fall. When they returned to camp, Daniel treated Roken's wound himself, wrapping the bandages tight. The alien winced but did not speak. Daniel looked him in the eyes and said, "You could have let me die, but you did not." "Why?" Roken hesitated, his pride fighting against his voice, but finally he spoke. "Because my vow is not empty words. You spared me, I am bound to you. Mercy is heavier than chains." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of that answer. He knew this was only the beginning. The war was not over. The path ahead was still filled with danger, but something had shifted. The humans would never forget what Roken had done, and Roken himself had taken the first step away from the warrior he once was. That night, the camp was quieter than before. The whispers of killing Roken faded, replaced by silence and thought. Some men still glared at him, but their eyes no longer burned with the same hatred. Roken lay beneath the stars, his arm aching, his body restless, but in his heart, he felt something unfamiliar. It was not pride, and it was not shame. It was the first spark of respect, not for himself, but for the human who had given him mercy, and for the people who fought with unyielding spirit, despite their fragile bodies. Trials were not over, and Roken knew greater tests awaited him, but for the first time since his defeat, he began to believe that perhaps serving Daniel was not a curse, but a chance to find a new path one he had never imagined when he first raised his blade against humanity. The night was heavy with silence broken only by the crackling of campfires and the faint sound of wind brushing against the torn banners that marked the human stronghold. The soldiers slept with weapons near their hands, their bodies curled against the cold earth, but not all eyes were closed. Beyond the perimeter in the shadows of broken walls, a figure watched and waited. It was one of Roken's kind of commanders still loyal to the alien cause. His armor was scarred from battle, his eyes burning with the fire of vengeance. He had come, not for bloodshed, but for whispers and bargains. Roken had left the camp under Daniel's order to scout the nearby ridges. His large frame moved silently through the ruins, though his every step carried the weight of the vow binding him. When he reached the ridge, he smelled the air and knew he was not alone. The presence of his kin was unmistakable. The commander stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "You kneel with humans, you carry their burdens. You shame our people." Rokanthe words cut like blades, but Roken stood firm. He answered in deep voice, "I live because a human chose to spare me, and by the code of our people, my life belongs to him." The commander sneered and stepped closer. "That code is a chain for fools. You were a champion, you could still be one. Break your vow, kill the human who binds you, and I will welcome you back. You will be free again, and your name will rise among us, as it once did." Roken's heart pounded. The thought of returning to his people to stand once more as a warrior of honor pulled at him. Yet another memory fought against it. He remembered the battlefield when Daniel lowered his blade and chose mercy when every reason pointed to death. That single act had weighed heavier than victory, heavier than pride. The commander's voice was sharp again. "Tomorrow we strike their camp. I will give you the chance to prove where your loyalty lies. Stand with us, and you will be restored. Stand with them, and you will die like a dog." Roken gave no answer. He turned back toward the human camp, his body tense, his mind burning with conflict. The shadows of his people still clung to him, whispering promises of power and freedom, but the image of Daniel's steady gaze and the memory of the soldiers fighting despite their fragile bodies kept returning to him. When he reached the camp, Daniel noticed the change in his eyes. He asked quietly, "What did you see?" Roken hesitated, his honor urging him to confess, but his pride made the words heavy. Finally he said, "My people are near. They prepare to strike. They offered me freedom in exchange for your life." Daniel studied him for a long moment, without anger, only with calm certainty, and asked, "And what did you choose?" Roken growled low, his jaw tight. "I chose nothing yet. My vow binds me, but my blood still calls to me." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and steady. "Then tomorrow you will face your choice, not with words, but with action." The next day came heavy with smoke. The enemy attacked at dawn, their weapons cutting through the air as they rushed the camp. The humans scrambled to defend their walls, arrows flying, rifles cracking, blades clashing in the chaos. Roken stood at the edge, his chest rising with the storm inside him. The commander of his people appeared across the field, eyes locked on him. He raised his weapon high, shouting, "Roken, stand with your people. Now strike the human and reclaim your honor." Daniel fought fiercely among his men, holding the line even as the enemy pressed harder. Roken's claws tightened around the hilt of a captured human blade. His vow screamed at him to protect his master, but his blood roared for freedom and pride. The moment came when Daniel stumbled under the swing of a massive alien warrior, his defense broken, the killing strike aimed at his chest. The commander shouted loudly, "Now Roken, take your freedom." Time slowed. The weight of two worlds crushed against Roken's chest. On one side lay the path of vengeance and pride, on the other, the path of loyalty, born from mercy. His body moved before his mind decided. He roared with a sound that shook the battlefield, and threw himself between Daniel and the strike. The blade cut deep into his side, tearing flesh and spilling blood, but he did not fall. Instead he grasped the enemy's weapon with his clawed hand and ripped it away, crushing it with sheer force. He swung his own blade with a fury that split the enemy down. Humans around him froze as they saw the alien bleed for their commander. Daniel rose to his feet, his eyes wide with shock, not of fear, but of recognition. Roken had chosen the commander on the enemy side, roared with rage. "You betray your people, Roken. You are nothing but a slave now." Roken stood tall, blood pouring from his wound, and bellowed back, "No, I am no slave. I am bound by choice, by mercy greater than your pride." The fight raged on, but now the humans rallied with renewed strength. The sight of the mighty alien protecting their own leader filled them with courage. They pushed harder side by side with Roken, cutting through the enemy ranks. Daniel fought near him, their blades moving almost in rhythm, as if years of brotherhood bound them. Instead of days of mistrust, the enemy began to break. Their commander cursed and withdrew, knowing the tide had turned. The field grew quiet as the last of the enemy fled into the smoke. The humans stood among the ruins, breathing hard, their eyes fixed on Roken, who leaned heavily on his blade, blood soaking the ground. Yet he did not fall. His chest heaved, his eyes burned with fire, not of pride, but of something deeper. Daniel approached and placed a steady hand on his arm. "You had your chance to betray me, and you chose to bleed for me." Why? Roken looked at him, his voice raw, "Because mercy changed me more than fear ever could. Because you spared me when I deserved death. And now I fight not because I must, but because I choose to." Daniel nodded and turned to his soldiers, speaking loudly so all could hear. "He has proven his loyalty today. Let none here doubt it again." The camp erupted in silence, no cheers, no applause, just the heavy weight of realization. Men who had once whispered of killing Roken now stared at him with something new in their eyes, not trust, not yet, but respect. The alien who had once brought them terror now stood bleeding among them as a protector. As night fell, Roken lay by the fire, his wound bound with rough cloth. Daniel sat beside him, sharpening his blade. The air between them was quiet, yet full of meaning. Words were needed, for both knew the truth. Roken had passed his greatest test. He had chosen loyalty, not because of chains, but because of something far stronger. The morning after the great clash arrived with a quiet sky. The smoke of battle still hung in the distance, but the ground was calm. The human camp stirred slowly, soldiers waking with heavy eyes, their bodies covered in cuts and bruises. Yet their hearts carried something different than before. They had seen with their own eyes the alien warrior who once sought to destroy them stand as their shield. They had seen him bleed, not for his own kind, but for them. For the first time, whispers of respect moved among them. Instead of hatred, Roken rose with effort, his side still wrapped in bandages, each step slow but steady. The wound had not broken him. His massive body bore pain with pride, but inside his spirit carried something he had never felt before. He walked through the camp carrying logs for the fires and heavy crates of supplies. The men stepped aside now, watching him not with disgust, but with quiet wonder. They still remembered their fallen brothers and sisters, yet they could not deny the truth. Mercy had turned an enemy into a protector. Daniel stood near the edge of camp, gazing toward the hills where the enemy had fled. He knew the battle was not over. The alien army would regroup and strike again, stronger than before. But he also knew something had changed forever. Their enemy was no longer a faceless force of destruction. Within their own camp stood proof that loyalty could be won not through fear, but through compassion. Roken approached Daniel and bowed his head low. "My life is yours, still human, but yesterday I did not fight because of chains. I fought because I chose to." Daniel looked into his eyes and saw no deceit, only truth. He nodded and placed a hand on Roken's shoulder. "Then you are no longer just a servant. You are my ally." That single word echoed across the camp, and the men who heard it repeated it quietly. Some still hesitated to accept it, but none denied it entirely anymore. For in war, loyalty was the rarest treasure, and Roken had given his in blood. Days that followed were filled with preparation. The enemy gathered strength on the horizon, and scouts returned with grim news. The final clash was near Daniel trained his soldiers, tirelessly sharpening their discipline and courage. Roken trained beside them, his towering form moving with precision and power. Taught them tactics of his people, showing them weaknesses in alien armor and methods of striking quickly. Some soldiers who once spat at him now listened carefully, their lives depending on his knowledge. Step by step he became part of their company. One night, as the campfire glowed and men sat in silence, Daniel and Roken spoke alone. Daniel asked him quietly, "Why did you beg for mercy that day? You could have died with pride." Roken lowered his head, his voice deep and heavy. "Pride is nothing when death comes. I wanted to live, but I thought life would only be shame. Instead, you gave me more than life. You gave me a chance to choose who I would become." Daniel listened without judgment, and for the first time he smiled faintly. "Then tomorrow, when the final battle comes, fight not as a servant and not as a slave. Fight as who you have chosen to be." Dawn of the last battle came with a roar of war drums across the plains. The alien army advanced like a tide, their banners high, their weapons shining in the rising sun. The humans stood in formation, their armor battered, but their spirits firm. At the front stood Daniel, his sword raised, and beside him stood Roken, towering like a mountain. The soldiers looked at the two figures and felt strength flow through them. The clash was brutal. Steel met steel, claws tore through shields, arrows darkened the sky. The humans fought with desperate courage, but the enemy pressed with endless numbers. Roken moved like a storm, crushing enemies with each strike, his roars shaking the battlefield. He shielded Daniel more than once, but Daniel too stood strong, cutting through enemies with precision. Together they fought as if bound by more than chance, bound by the strange force that had grown from mercy at the height of the battle. The enemy commander stepped forward, the same one who had once tempted Roken. His voice thundered across the field. "You are still one of us, Roken. Stand aside, and I will spare you. Stand with them, and I will end you." Roken lifted his blade, blood dripping from his wounds, and bellowed back, "I was yours once, but mercy made me more than your pride ever did. I stand with the humans because they gave me life and purpose." The words rolled across the field, striking both armies with their weight. With a roar, Roken charged the commander, their blades meeting in a storm of sparks. Daniel rushed with him, and together they fought side by side. The duel raged long and fierce until finally, with one great strike, Roken broke the enemy's weapon, and Daniel drove his blade into the commander's chest. The alien army faltered, their leader fallen, their will shattered. The humans pressed forward with cries of victory, driving the enemy into retreat. When the field grew quiet, only the sound of wind moved over the plain. The humans stood bloodied but alive. Their cheers rose not just for Daniel but for Roken as well. Some clapped their hands against their armor, others raised their weapons high. For the first time, the alien who had once been their terror now stood as their brother in arms. Roken looked across the field at the bodies of both humans and his own kind. His chest was heavy, but not with shame. Instead, he felt something new, a sense of belonging that no battlefield had ever given him. He turned to Daniel and said softly, "Once I begged for life. Now I live with purpose." Daniel nodded and replied, "Then let us build something worth living." For war did not end with that battle, but a new path had begun. The humans carried their victory with pride, and with them marched the alien who had chosen mercy over pride, loyalty over vengeance. Roken no longer felt bound by chains. He walked freely at Daniel's side, and in his heart he knew he had been reborn, not as a champion of his old people, but as a warrior of a new bond. Sun set on the battlefield, casting golden light across the broken land. The soldiers marched forward, carrying hope in their hearts, and at the center walked Daniel and Roken, side by side, not master and servant, not captor and captive, but all eyes forged by mercy, trust, and blood. And so the tale of the defeated warrior who once cried for mercy became the tale of redemption, a story whispered among both armies that even in the darkest war, a single act of compassion could change the fate of two worlds. The end.